Well, good afternoon. I want to thank you for joining us today for the second of two conversations Edelman Global Advisory is hosting around the 2022 midterm elections. I'm the moderator for today's panel. I serve as the chair for North America and the Global Economic Trade Lead for the security practice. My prior background includes a stint in Congress and work in the White House, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, and also as Senior Vice President for Global Public Policy at General Motors. We know that the 22 midterm election is set up to be an increasingly competitive one. Polling shows that issues are highly charged, voters are motivated, and we know that many different issues are on their mind. Part of what we're doing with this series is to unwrap some of those issues, give you some insights from experts around the city and even the country. And so we hope we can provide a little bit of insight as to what's motivating the voters and what's going to be driving them towards as we get closer to the midterm vote. Last week, our team of experts looked at critical issues such as education, abortion, the Supreme Court, and the future of our democracy, and identified how those issues will be impacting voters. Today, we're going to look at a very critical issue, one that has come up repeatedly as the top issue for many voters, and that's the economy. In fact, over 90% of Americans say they're concerned about the state of the economy and inflation. 80% say the economy will play a major role in how they vote more than any other issue. And 68% say the Biden administration could be doing more to combat inflation. So it's clear that inflation and the economy are critical issues that are very important to the voters. And these issues are coming up against a backdrop that indicates that this midterm election cycle is going to be similar to the past and what we have termed a course correction. It's not unusual for an election to turn after the first 2 years of a new presidency, but there's some new data that shows that may be even more the case during this midterm election. Edelman's Trust Barometer showed us a couple of things when we polled Americans across the country. First, trust in government is the lowest it's been in several years. With more than 57% of Americans believe government is a dividing force in society. Nearly 2/3 of Americans are concerned they are being lied to by government leaders, and 42% of those surveyed by Edelman have little faith. Only 42% of those surveyed have faith in government leaders. So for a party in power, those trust numbers don't bode well. And there's other factors as well. As I said, following the first 2 years of a new presidency, we tend to see a course change election. Since World War II, the new president's party has lost an average of 28.6 seats in the House of Representatives, and it's often worse when the president's party controls both houses of Congress, which of course is the case today with the Democrats in control of the House and the Senate. So we've got a very important issue before us, the economy. We have indicators that this could be a course change election. But there's a lot to unpack. It's not as simple as all that. So to help us unpack some of this data and understand the issues driving the voters, we've invited two experts to join us today. First, we are joined by DJ Nordquist. DJ is the Executive Vice President of the Economic Innovation Group, a bipartisan policy organization dedicated to forging a more dynamic and inclusive American economy. Welcome, DJ. She has had a number of many important roles in the private sector, at think tanks, and on Capitol Hill. Very prominently and recently, she served as the Chief of Staff for the Council of Economic Advisors at the White House, and also was unanimously confirmed as the United States representative on the board of directors of the World Bank Group. So she comes to us with some great credentials, and we're really looking forward to talking through these issues with you today, DJ. Again, thank you for joining us. We're also joined by Kevin Casey. Kevin is a principal at S3 Group, which is a bipartisan government relations and public policy affairs firm. Kevin has more than 2 decades of experience on Capitol Hill. He recently served as the policy director for Congressman Joseph Crowley, Democrat from New York, very important member, chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, and he was the 4th highest ranking member in the House Democratic leadership. Kevin has a lot of expertise in tax and financial services, in addition to many other areas of expertise. He knows Congress. As a policy director, he worked closely with the Democratic and tri-caucus leadership to ensure that the priorities and perspectives of the entire caucus were communicated to the House Democrats. Early in his career, he worked for Congressman Bob Weigand from Rhode Island, and also for Congressman then Congressman Sherrod Brown, whom we know now as a senator from Ohio. So we've got great background, a lot of good political acumen here at the table, a lot of good economic insights we're going to be able to dig into. So really looking forward, and thank you, Kevin, for joining us as well. It's really terrific to have you here.
Thank you, Everett. DJ.
Hey, it's a pleasure. And let's dive in right away. The economy. We know the economy is an issue, but there's a difference of opinion about what impact it's going to have on voters. There's been over the summer a bit of a debate about, yes, the economy is important. Voters are worried, but there's other issues they care about. For example, earlier this year, the Supreme Court ruled in Dobbs versus Jackson that abortions were no longer federally protected, ending over 50 years of precedent. Voters made it clear, especially Democrats, that that will be an extremely important issue for them in this election. In fact, the other day, Joe Biden insisted this is driving people to the polls and promised that it will be one of the first issues addressed by the House of Representatives if it is retained by the Democrats. And many believe that it will turn some moderate voters to vote Democrat, and then it is going to be one of the core issues that will drive voters to the polls, perhaps over the economy, despite the concerns we heard at the top end. So my question to you is, and we'll start with you, Kevin, how big an issue is the economy in the voters' minds? And are there other issues that may be more important in their votes? And DJ, I'll ask for you to follow up and answer that question as well.
I'd have to say I think the economy is the number one issue. Well, it's the old expression that a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose yours. But I think the Dobbs decision is helpful to Democrats. I'll kick up with that first, because in midterm elections, particularly when one party controls the two branches of government, legislative, executive, that you need to motivate your base. And I think what we saw before the SCOTUS decision in Dobbs was you had a Republican base that was highly motivated to vote this November, and Democrats were less motivated. I think what the Dobbs decision did is it helped increase and juice up the motivation Democrats. We saw that play out in the Kansas referendum on reproductive rights this summer, and we saw it when Democrats won the open house seat in Alaska, and we saw it when Democrats won the open Delgado seat in New York 19 in New York State, a race that the NRC chair Tom Emmer said should be looked at as a bellwether that the Republicans would win. It is a D+2 seat. The Democrat won by 3 and slightly overperformed President Biden in that seat. So I do think the Dobbs decision is very helpful for Democrats electorally in terms that it will motivate turnout and getting our voters juiced up. Stating that, the economy is still always a top priority issue for everyone. And I think on this factor, I want to say I think Democrats have done an excellent job policy-wise, being a party of policies, but I think they've not communicated what they've done as effectively as they could. I mean, right now, we are meeting virtually, but now as more of a luxury than a necessity. 2 years ago, we would have to meet as a necessity virtually. I mean, remember, when President Biden took office, 46% of schools were open. 100% of schools are open today. I mean, all stores are open. People, like, the issue we have now is people can't get flights because everyone's going on vacation, as opposed to no one's allowed to travel. We're allowed to leave our house and go on vacation and go to work. And life's gotten a lot better in the past 2 years. But I think Democrats have not done the best job of communicating how far we've gone in 2 years, because people honestly forget because they're dealing with their day-to-day life. But I think it's a tough issue.
Yeah, it's very complicated. I personally am thrilled that we're no longer in Zoom all the time, though I'm thrilled we can do this with you today. But that is something I hear people say repeatedly. And DJ, what's your perspective? What role do you think the economy is going to play in driving voters?
So, I mean, the economy is obviously front and center. I mean, all the polls are showing that. And it's something that just touches people every day in every way. I mean, people need to go buy food at the grocery store. Food prices are up, on average 13.5% year over year. There's certain categories of food. Meat is up far more than that, eggs, et cetera, et cetera. So people go to the grocery store and they're leaving with, bags that are smaller, less things in them for the same price. There's also what's known as shrinkflation, where instead of getting like a pound of something, like whatever, your box of cereal is only half full. So people are feeling that. People particularly feel it at the gas pump. I mean, gas is what's known as inelastic. People, need gas to get places. I've been watching, actually, I highly recommend it, Rich Tao, who's a pollster who's done this swing voter project where he's looked at swing voters in Pennsylvania and a few other places. And it's qualitative focus groups. But I mean, there was a woman talking about how she lives an hour and a half from her parents and used to see them every weekend, and now she can't afford it. She goes, once every 6 weeks. So, it's hitting people where it hurts. People don't really understand it. And I think, part of the issue is Kevin was talking about, like, Democrats aren't really talking about, what they've done. I mean, if you talk about it in a macroeconomic sense, the enormous amount of spending, $4 to $5 trillion is what's feeding inflation. I mean, obviously there's a monetary side of this. The Fed was behind the curve, but the fiscal side of the house really, really has not helped. And the other thing Kevin mentioned was schools. I do think voters are really angry about what is going on in schools. They didn't think that schools needed to be shut down for 2 years. And obviously there were huge fights about that. And it's shown, in all the statistics. NAEP, the nation's report card, just came out. I mean, kids lost points. They've lost, particularly minority and disabled kids are really, really falling behind because of remote school. And parents are also pissed about the curriculum. Probably the only interesting bright spot of school closures was that parents were in the sort of room next door and they were listening to what their kids were learning and they were going, what? So, I think it's been good for democracy, actually, because parents are now really, really focused on, what's going on in their schools. Kevin also mentioned, flights and how, nobody can get a flight anymore, or you're delayed 3 or 4 hours or 2 days in some cases. It's great that people are traveling. Obviously, when you look at the inflation patterns, first we had, very, very high goods inflation because people were locked up and there was a lot of stimulus. And so they were buying a lot of goods. For some reason, a lot of economists were out there saying, well, once the economy is back open, we won't really have that inflation because it'll, consumption will move to the services side of the economy. Except, of course, the services side of the economy is also, prone to inflation, particularly when you have what's called a wage price spiral, where, wages keep having to be raised and raised and raised because we have this labor shortage, which goes back to the flights issue, which is we have a labor shortage in this country. Unfortunately, we got in this mode where we were paying people to not work, and we were giving people stimulus. And so there was a lot of excess savings that built up that, definitely caused a lot of the inflation. I think the Democrat, interestingly, the message that Nancy Pelosi recently made was, but, inflation's global. It's not just us. That is true. However, we are unfortunately culpable for that because we exported our inflation because we started doing all these, stimuli, and our central bank did not, take away the punch bowl, and every other country followed us. And given that we're the world's largest economy, what happens here definitely ricochets around the world.
Yeah, and we'll get to the global. We'll have some opportunity to talk about the global economy here towards the end as well. But I'm going to give Kevin we're going to segue really into the economy, Kevin. I'm sure you'll be able to get your some reaction there. But let me just say one thing about the teachers and your point about being with the students during the pandemic shutdown. It was incredible to be there and listen to the teachers. And I just want to put in a plug that not all of them are, I was amazed at how good some of the teachers were for my kids. So that gave me some faith, but there were others I was not so confident. So it is a decidedly mixed bag, but
on a side note, not my daughter's teacher, but there was a video going around the school where one of the a teacher who also is one of the top leadership officials in the school actually taught a class while driving.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. Well, let's hope we don't have to go through that ever again. It was quite traumatic for us, I think, as people and as a country. So Kevin, you're going to get a shot to react here. The question is, what is going on in the economy? Because the data is decidedly mixed. And we know inflation's the highest it's been in 40 years. We know gas prices are high, but they're volatile. They've fallen. They've certainly fallen from their heights. We know wages are up, which is good, but inflation is eroding consumer purchasing power. On the other hand, we have incredibly low unemployment rates. There's job postings in practically anybody who wants a job can get a job. So in many ways, it's a mixed bag on the economy. And so what's your perspective? I mean, where are we in the state of the economy, and how are voters seeing it?
I mean, I think the economy is doing quite well. And I mean, just looking at some of the points that DJ made a minute ago is some of the words she's excess savings and wages rising. And I get there's an inflationary pressures going on, but for most people, like, their wages are going up. There is demand in the workforce. Now, there are some policies that need to be done, and I think have been done by the Biden administration in a bipartisan way to address some of them. You had the infrastructure law that came in, which included a lot of apprenticeship programs. It was something that was bipartisan. Now, generally, it was all Democrats and a small sliver of Republicans, but it was bipartisan. It brought people together to get that done. And you know, like, when we look back at the last recession that happened, in 2007 and 2009, you had 11 million people lose their homes. I mean, millions unemployed. So this time, we flooded the economy with money. And the economics, we can make an argument whether too much money went to the economy, but you did not have the mass homelessness that we had last time. People got to stay in their homes. Yes, 22 million jobs were lost in a year under President Trump. They've all come back plus more. And, we're building those jobs for the economy for the future. I mean, you look at the CHIPS Act, another bipartisan accomplishment by President Biden. I mean, you were seeing that led to an Intel plant in Ohio. The president and Senator Chuck Schumer are up celebrating with Micron with a new plant going up there in Syracuse, New York today. I mean, you were seeing these are the types of jobs that are investing in our future. They are bringing supply chains back home. They are lessons learned from the past. And these are the good paying tech jobs we need for the future. And just look at the Inflation Reduction Act on gas prices. This gas price drama is the same thing that happens every 20 years or so, when the Saudis and OPEC decide they're going to show who's boss. And this time, Congress, this time on a partisan basis, all the Democrats got together to say, that's the end. We need to find alternative sources of energy so that the Saudis don't control us anymore. And the president has communicated that the Saudis have decided to go in with the Russians and to increase gas prices and to, for whatever their political reason is, this administration, and I know a lot of leading Democrats have said it's time to reset our relationship with the Saudis because they should not be telling us who's boss. I agree with everyone. We are the world's largest economy, and we are a superpower not because we're great, but because we're good. And we can't let the Saudis boss us around anymore on gas prices. And I think that's something to see with the Inflation Reduction Act. It's going to take a few years. It's longer term, so it's not going to lower gas prices immediately. But these are the types of things that will have positive impacts long term. And one more thing I just want to mention when it comes to inflation and prices is, the president is trying to use the FTC in ways to break up some monopolies. So when I was a kid back in the 1980s, I moisturized. That's why I look this good. I had to get glasses. In those days, you went to the optometrist and you had to get your glasses from the optometrist, and you paid high prices. Now, I was 9, so anything more than 50 cents was a high price to me. So I don't know what we paid, but they were expensive. And all of a sudden, the FTC got involved and they changed the rules, and that helped create new competition, and that created like a Warby Parker, and all these new businesses come up, so that nowadays I can get my glasses for $80. I probably pay less for glasses in real terms today than my parents did in 1983. And we're seeing the same thing. The president's doing that now in the hearing aid market. I mean, most seniors can't afford hearing aids. They're $3,000. He's opening the market to competition that within maybe a year or so, that you'll be able to get these at a Walmart or a Target, and they'll be $100. Yeah. We've seen the president try this on inflation. And that is something the president and Democrats in Congress tried to bring inflation from the average of $400 a month to $35 a month. That was killed in the Senate by Senate Republicans. I mean, there are real ways that inflation could be addressed, both in the short term and long term. I think the administration is trying to take every attempt it can, but some of those attempts will take longer term, like the hearing aids issue and the gas prices. And some shorter term have been thwarted politically, like the insulin prices.
Yeah, well, Kevin, you really touched on it. There's a lot of different ways to view this, and you raised some of the points that show why it's such a mixed mixed picture. So to hear, a different perspective, let's turn to DJ. And how do you see the economy, and what do you think might be some of the factors that are driving inflation and the policy solutions too?
Well, so I wanted to go back to Kevin's point about wages going up. Wages are going up. Wages actually started to go up during the last administration, which was a result of the tightening labor market. But I don't think you can say that real wages are up right now. Once you factor in inflation, wages year over year are down, 4%. So wages are not keeping up with inflation, which leads to this wage price spiral, which just, employers need to raise wages to keep up with inflation, which causes more inflation. So it's not a pretty picture. I am trying to understand how the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, caused gas prices to go down. I don't recall there being anything in there about that, but oil is a global market. And we have a reduction in gas prices, mainly because China has been in massive lockdown. 200 to 300,000, gas consumers are off the market right now. And so that has definitely helped us. The SPR release has helped us. Some would argue that midterm election is not a reason to unload the SPR. Both sides do it. I think my issue with the current release is we're now at the lowest level of oil reserves since 1984, and it would not surprise me if Russia has more in store for the world. So it makes me a little bit nervous that the SPR is so low. I really feel like they should have refilled the SPR when the pandemic hit, and people were paying suppliers. Suppliers were paying people to take oil off their hands. So that would have been a really good time to fill up the SPR. In terms of Saudi, I couldn't agree more that we should not be dependent on the Saudis or other I wouldn't put them in the same category, but the Iranians or the Venezuelans. Energy independence is a great thing, and the main issue with gas prices and energy prices in general is its supply and demand, and I don't see anything in the IRA that helps increase supplies in the United States. And in fact, this administration has shut down the Keystone Pipeline. They've made it very difficult for energy investors to want to make long-term plans. So right now they're really focused on balance sheets. And so, I think that, energy is a whole different conversation. I think it's we're moving faster towards the energy transition. I'm for all forms of energy. I don't see hydrocarbons ever being completely eliminated. Right now it's 80% of energy. If we can get it down with real baseload energy, that's super important. A lot of renewables are great, but the technology is not quite there yet. Nuclear is super important. That is a good green baseload energy, and a lot of countries are actually having to rethink their nuclear stance. And there's a lot of new technology in that field that's super important. But I want to go back to sort of the trust question, which is one of the reasons I think what Everett mentioned is people think that politicians are lying to them and that the government is lying to them. So when you have something called the Inflation Reduction Act, which clearly does not reduce inflation, I think that is a problem with trust in this country. And it's not just politicians that do it. I think we had a massive erosion in trust over COVID because our scientific experts kept changing. First it was you don't need to mask, then it was you need to mask, then you need a double mask. Then if you get vaccinated, you'll be fine. Oh, wait, no, if you get vaccinated, you still need a mask. That's very, very confusing for the average American and it erodes trust. Going back to what Kevin said about the FTC and competition, totally agree. Found something we agree on. That is, fantastic. We do need to spur more competition in the economy, and I will give the administration props for the moves on non-compete reform, which is super important. That is also, that helps people move from job to job. And it used to be something that was used rarely for very high skilled workers. Now it's being used for barbers and beauticians. And so it should be great. That'd be very good for economic mobility.
Yeah.
And just one thing, as I was saying, on the Inflation Reduction Act, I think it is helping us research and find new sources of alternative energy sources. So not just gasoline, but and I didn't mean to, that's why I was saying it's a long term to help us reduce energy costs and immediate costs. I want to correct that. But on the trust issue, I mean, when it comes to scientists, I mean, when a new virus or disease breaks out, like no one has the answers right away. I mean, we have to defend the science there. And I think the scientists, and I know Dr. Fauci loves to be fill-in to some on the right, like they did the best they could. I mean,
I agree with you. I wish he would have said that. I wish he would have said, gosh, I was wrong. Like, I never really got a sense that, like, you know, anybody was willing to say.
Unfortunately, we don't have Dr. Fauci here to defend himself.
Yeah,
but when it comes,
very, very difficult job. But, you know, and then you have, of course, you know, that NIH was actually funding the research in the Wuhan labs. So that all leads into this trust issue, right?
But I think that the trust issue, the core issue comes down to the former president of the United States said in 2016, if I lose the election, I will deny it. And in 2020, refuses to concede. Like he is telling his supporters, and about now a third of the country, that our elections are all rigged and fake if your team loses.
So I agree with that. I don't think Donald Trump was the first person to do that. I think both sides do it.
Yeah,
I wish nobody would do that. And I also wish, you know, obviously Democrats have done it. Republicans are doing it now. Democrats also push this voter suppression narrative, which I also don't think is correct. I think it'd be great if everybody stopped on both sides.
Well, and I think you're both making.
But in fairness, I mean, no one has ever questioned an election the way Trump has in American history, full stop.
2020?
Let me just interject here. I'd like to.
2000?
Yeah, let me just interject.
Did Al Gore concede?
Kevin.
Eventually.
We addressed the issue.
It took them a long time.
I tell you what, I will happily buy you both dinner where you can continue this debate.
All right, I just want to make sure we have to make sure that we have this comparison where people say, you know what, this small thing happened here that, you know, Al Gore said, let's let the court decide. The court decided, he conceded. And Donald Trump, the court decided, all Trump judges, and he still won't concede.
If I remember correctly, Gore forced how many recounts?
How many recounts?
Let's table this.
There were at least 2 recounts, and then it went to the Supreme Court. So
if we could please just table this for a moment, I'd like to make one point about the trust data. It's not simple, and it can't be. It's not any one issue. So, and I do think that it's easy to say, well, this is what caused erosion of trust, and this is what caused erosion of trust. If you're really interested, take a look at the document that we have available on our website. It goes into the trust data very deeply. And in fact, it talks a lot about how different populations view entities. And the trust data is pretty telling about where the economy is. For example, high income earners tend to trust government more than low income earners. There's all kinds of good data. So my caution is, let's not overinterpret the data and blame it on an action by one or the other. There's a cumulative effect here. And we have a lot of good data, and we can, you know, follow up and talk through the trust data. But I would like to get back to the energy question, because it really comes to the core issue that we see is everybody recognizes that energy security is a problem in the United States. But what I hear from you is that we don't agree on what the solutions are. And I think we can talk, you know, that thread out a little more. Some of it say, you know, well, it's the Democrats and the climate policies. They turned America from an energy exporter to an energy importer. Democrats say, well, look at the war in Ukraine. This is Putin's price hike, is what was said in the White House. And then you have geopolitical events that are even beyond our control, such as the OPEC initiative. Even after President Biden went over there, they came together and said, let's constrain supply to keep prices up. And they did it in dialogue with some of the countries we actually are having some deep tensions with. So the energy question is really not, it's so complicated, and the policy prescriptions are very different. But we're 2 weeks out from an election. Who do you think the voters are going to support, and whose policies do you think are resonating? with voters as to who's the party best able to bring energy prices to stability and affordability?
I think there's two different questions. I would say who is resonating with the voters? I mean, I think the polls will show Republicans. And I mean, the average American doesn't follow policy. And they shouldn't. They have real lives to live. Like, we do this for a living. And they know gas prices are up. Like, they don't. My old boss used to say, when it came to like pipelines, pipelines, one of the staff said, I don't understand why these workers want to build these pipelines that are bad for oil and gas and for their families. And my old boss said, you know what? These are unionized workers who are building pipelines that are like putting food on the table for themselves. They don't care if Italian dressing runs these pipelines. They don't care. They're there to build pipelines. That's their livelihood. And I think like the real people, just average people, see gas prices are up. That is a bad sign for the party in power. The party in power is Democrats. So which argument is resonating? The Republicans' argument, absolutely politically. But I think the second part of your question was, what is the longer term policy prescription? And I mean, and this is the one thing I think, well, DJ and I agree on a lot of things, that we can't go through the cyclical every 20 years gas price crisis. We need to figure out a way out of it. And yes, we cannot give up fossil fuels immediately. No, that we can't. And I think you have some Democrats who say that we should get rid of them tomorrow. And that's an absolutely ludicrous idea because it's just not realistic. But at the same time, they're not going to be there forever. And that we got to be concerned about our environment. And that there are other sources of energy we can look at. We need more investment in solar and wind and other renewables and maybe nuclear and other solutions out there. And I think that's something we do invest more in. And I think the problem politically is you now have a side that says, you know, fossil fuels are terrible versus only fossil fuels. And anything that's not a fossil fuel is evil. And I think that type of discussion is harmful for all of us long term.
Yeah, I agree with that, although I'm not sure that there are people who think it should only be fossil fuels. At least I don't know any of them. You know, I mean, I think, so part of the issue with green, and I'm pro green, I'm on the board of a solar fintech, is, you know, like I mentioned, the baseload issue, but also if you think that all, you know, hydrocarbons are evil, right? I mean, the issue is there are a lot of byproducts of hydrocarbons, like plastic. Now, a lot of people think plastic's bad, but it's in everything, right? It's in your clothes. Like, I mean, and going back to like the international question, I mean, we saw in Sri Lanka, we had a government that said only use organic fertilizer, which brought down the government. I mean, literally, that is how the government in Sri Lanka fell, because people couldn't afford fertilizer. So, you know, I think the issue is that we're probably, a lot of people seem to want to trade like a fossil dependent economy on an extractive, mineral extractive economy. And I just don't think that there's been enough research on whether we have enough of those minerals, how we extract them. And when you think about like some of the critical rare earth minerals coming out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, like they're using child labor to dig up these minerals. China is processing them all. So we've traded dependence on, or, you know, some dependence on Saudis and other countries that don't like us, to dependence on China for solar panels. I mean, Everett and I were part of the, you know, the big trade action, was it the 201 against the solar manufacturers? And, you know, unfortunately, by the time the ITC figured out what the ruling was, all of the US companies had gone out of business. They were driven out of business by the Chinese SOEs. Now, I know that some of the, you know, the IRA and other legislation is going to try to bring some of that manufacturing back home. That's great, but, you know, in economics there are trade-offs, and you know, I don't think that people understand that those are, you know, mineral extraction can be a dirty industry. So maybe the environmentalists don't want that, you know, in this country.
But I'm glad you both agree that the Inflation Reduction Act is something that's being looked at to try to bring those solar jobs and other jobs back to the country. I do agree with you on that.
Yeah, although actually we looked at this when I was in the White House. The main solar jobs are the installation jobs. It's not the manufacturing jobs. I think it's like 10 times more manufacturing installation jobs than manufacturing jobs. Like maybe
installation. Those are like carpentry and other skilled trade union, big trade union jobs. So I think that's, yeah. I'm very comfortable that if it's still 10-1 manufacturing and installation, there's still 10-1 those to be all American jobs. So I think that, and that's saying that,
Well, we will see when in a few months which party is in control and which policy solutions will be debated. There's no easy answer, that's for sure, and there's no short-term answer. So it's a very interesting points. I'm sure we could do a whole discussion on energy in of itself. But let's turn to I'm going to ask, before we get to geopolitics, I want to ask one question and hopefully get a nice pithy answer, though it may be impossible.
It's like the McLaughlin group, yes or no.
Yeah. Okay. So
metaphysical certainty.
We talked about what impact will it have on voters. We all agreed it could be significant, but there's other issues such as the ruling in Dobbs. It may impact some voters more than others. We talked about the state of the economy, differing views. Could be better. We all agreed on that. But there's some bright spots, but there's a lot of other spots that are very concerning as well. We even talked a little bit about the cause of it. Is it supply chains? Is the Inflation Reduction Act going to be the solution? Is it energy prices? It's such a complicated picture. So imagine voters out there struggling with these issues. Well, let me ask you a really easy question. Is inflation transitory or not? And are we on the verge of a recession?
So I'll take that one first. It's like, depends on what your definition of is, right? Depends on what your definition of transitory is. Over a year ago, like in the February of 21, the T word was being used all the time. And I'm a data nerd and I read hundreds of charts every day. And I'm like, it just doesn't really seem transitory to me. There's some structural issues here with labor force shortages, supply chain snarl-ups, that it just didn't seem like it was going to be transitory to me. And I think that the T word has actually officially been retired. I think Janet Yellen said she was going to retire it, or maybe it was Larry Summers. The question is, how much longer is it going to last? The Fed tightening has a policy lag, so we'll see. I don't think that the Fed has a great track record of quashing inflation without, unemployment going up. So, and that's what Jay Powell says when he talks about pain. And so it's unfortunate that we're, in this situation. But I think, at the end of the day, the fundamentals are they're improving in some areas and less in others. Supply chain have gotten much better. Shipping, a lot of, the snarl-ups at the ports, are better. China is still in lockdown. Interestingly, the GDP numbers that came out today, one of the drivers was exports, which I just don't understand because the dollar is so strong. Right. So that's not going to stick. Most people are projecting, recession at the beginning of next year. Some people, by the standard definition, we were in a recession in the first 2 quarters of this year. And getting back to trust, the White House tried to explain that technically it wasn't a recession, but everybody else, negative 2 quarters of growth is a recession. But the fundamental labor shortage issue is still going to be there. We're not as bad off as China. I mean, their demographic challenge is much worse than ours, but I do worry about our demographics. I think that, one of the answers, particularly with all of these new jobs in, high skilled manufacturing, infrastructure, et cetera, like we need to, first of all, improve our own educational system, but we also need a focus on high-skilled immigration. There are a lot of high-skilled workers who want to come to this country. We should be welcoming them. They are, entrepreneurs. They're a great addition. And meanwhile, Canada and the UK, are sort of hoovering up, as they would say, all the high-skilled immigrants that we are not.
Yeah,
I generally want to agree with what DJ said. I mean, I think she made a really good picture, but I mean, I think. The inflation is going to be a challenge for us for a bit. Yeah, I mean, but I think mostly it comes down to the gas prices because it goes into everything.
Yeah.
Actually, I think housing. The housing market is usually, that's a leading indicator. Labor market is a lagging indicator, and we're seeing the housing market have a massive downturn right now because of the Fed, tightening. Mortgage rates just went up to 7% today. So, the housing share of U.S. GDP, depending on how you count, is like between 17 and 20% of our GDP. And so once the market falls, which it is, I mean, that is going to have massive repercussions throughout the economy.
Yeah, we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us for sure. And one that was raised in the chat. Oh, sorry, Kevin.
But I think we have a lot of promise ahead of us as well. And I mean, I think a lot of good steps have made. I mean, with looking at cleaner futures of energy, looking at the CHIPS Act, looking at the investment we made, and looking at the fact that 10, 11 million people didn't lose their homes in this recession. So I mean, I think there's a lot of things that prevented.
Sorry, did you just say we're in a recession, Kevin?
No. From the last recession. But I think that a lot of promises made in a lot of the laws that have been passed in the past couple of years for a longer term, brighter future for America. So I want to say, like, there's some challenges out there. There's nothing we haven't already started to look at and already starting to tackle.
And I will say,
well, let's go to one. Let's go to one and see if there's consensus on that as well. So
just real quick, I just do want to say, like, I will say again, this administration has done a good job on the housing side, focusing on supply. They understand that, I mean, even in the down housing market, particularly affordable housing, there's a supply issue. So I wish they would focus on supply on the energy side as well.
Well, I think so. One of the issues that was raised in the chat that I actually have some data on as well is it's on the global economy and specifically the role of China. And let me give you a couple statistics. Recent polling showed that 63% of Americans describe the condition of the global economy as a major threat to the United States. So they see this as a problem that's not just solvable here, but even the global economy is a threat. And then over 67% of Americans view China's power and influence as a major threat to the United States. Clearly, that element resonates with voters. It's important to them. Where do you see the two different parties on this? And DJ, I'm going to start with you. I started with Kevin a couple of times. We'll start with you, DJ, and then we'll go to Kevin.
I actually think there is, this is a great area of bipartisan agreement that, China is a threat. I think, Donald Trump was definitely out front on this. He probably doesn't get enough credit for that. But what's interesting is, Biden administration has continued all of the Trump, the trade policies, the tariffs are still there. And actually, I mean, Everett and I, when we were in the White House, like, as somebody who, is a econ nerd, like, we don't really like tariffs. Economists hate tariffs. And I really, I think if it should have been sold as a national security issue, it wasn't going to benefit American consumers. It was a national security issue. If you tell people this is a national security issue, people get it, right? So yeah, I mean, China is, as Everett and I know, like, they don't play fair. And they've been stealing our intellectual property. They steal about 3% of our GDP a year. And my former boss, Kevin Hassett, used to joke, like, if there were Somali pirates off the east coast of the United States stealing 3% of our GDP, there would be outrage. But, like, for years we were like, they're stealing our IP. So finally we're pushing back. Export controls, have been increased. My hope is that it's not too late. They are the world's second largest economy on a PPP basis. They are actually a larger economy than the United States. They have a very different system of rules and laws, and it's a very regressive, authoritarian regime. I've seen firsthand. I worked at a multilateral institution. I worked at the World Bank. Like, I've seen how China behaves in these multilateral fora, it's, I think the combination of COVID, I think, woke up a lot of people. And then the fact that China didn't call out Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think has put more attention on what China is and what a threat they are to us. And unfortunately, what it's done is it's created this sort of bifurcation in the world between sort of China and Russia, and then sort of the democracies in the West. And that makes it very difficult in a multilateral setting.
And we've seen it be part of many campaigns as well. So I know some candidates are emphasizing it, but Kevin, what's your view?
I generally have to agree with a lot of DJ said. I mean, we allowed China to eat our lunch for a long time. There were some repercussions about it. I think the Trump administration did start to get tough. I think the Biden administration has gotten tougher, and I think that's good. And it continued some of the policies, and I think it's good because we need to stay tough on China. I mean, I pretty much have to agree with pretty much everything DJ said. And I think that is one area that we can find some real bipartisan consensus in the next Congress if conventional wisdom holds and one or both chambers switch. because that's something we can all work on together. And then,
yeah, I kind of thought I thought we might find some common ground there. We'll see if the policy solutions are all the same, but yes, there's a deepening concern there, and it's a very, very difficult problem. And of course, as part of the issue concern with China is what drove some bipartisan support for the CHIPS Act and some of the other policies that are being undertaken now. We're at time. I'm going to do a closing remarks, but just if I give you an opportunity to do, what would be the key takeaway you want people? You're two veteran communicators. You both are policy experts. You're political savvy. What takeaway would you like to leave? What short takeaway would you like to leave with people that are watching this about voters, the economy, and the midterm elections? Kevin?
I mean, quickly, 2 years ago, you were stuck in your home with no job and couldn't go on vacation. The world's opened up. COVID's no longer a death sentence. It's treatable. We have a vaccine. Things are getting better for America. The best days are yet to come.
DJ?
I'm normally the optimist. Although, as you know, the Harry S. Truman expression about economists always say on the one hand, the other hand, he wanted a one-armed economist. I do think our economy is, we've had a lot of shocks, a lot of economic shocks. We need to, I guess, get better at sort of inoculating ourselves, to use the COVID analogy, against these economic shocks. I guess my final word is that, we all live in a political town, but I think if you get out of DC, most Americans just want to live their lives, and they don't hate each other, and they're not yelling and screaming at each other all the time. And part of the trust barometer was no trust in media, no trust in this. I mean, there are no institutions that anybody has any trust in anymore. And I think that's part of this sort of culture of social media and cable news and et cetera, et cetera. And, I wish everybody would stop with the name calling. We had a very nice debate just now, and I'm sure Kevin and I will stay in touch. So,
I'm sure you will.
Everett did say he was going to take us to dinner, so I want to make sure.
No, I'm happy to do that. I really am. It would be a lot of fun. But let me just say, DJ, you raised a good point about the trust barometer, and there is actually an institution that is among the most trusted right now, and it's business. Which is a trend we've been seeing, is that business is now the most trusted institution by many demographics and generally. And what that means is that business sees itself taking on more and more responsibilities for being good stewards, for allowing political discourse, for addressing social issues, and even addressing geopolitical issues. So we've had a lot of discussions on that. Again, if anyone in the audience is interested, I encourage you to go into the Trust Barometer, take a look at the deck we put together in support of this webinar. There's a lot of good data in there that gives you some good insights. But trust is really critical. I thought that I loved the discussion today. I thought you both made really strong points. It was a really vibrant dialogue. And I think it shows that no matter which party wins control of the Congress, they're set to govern a nation that sees things differently. Again, that's going to lead corporations to continue navigating sensitive considerations around social, economic, and cultural issues. Nothing is easy. Regardless of what happens in the next cycle in this election, we'll still have problems to deal with. We'll still need to work together to deal with them. So for those of you who want to continue the conversation, I would, and you're glued to this election as we are, join us next week where we'll continue our discussion on some of the most critical issues driving the nation. Joining us next week will be former U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Texas, John Bash, and former Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter, who are going to discuss safety and security and the impact that issue will have on the 2020 midterm elections. That webinar will be on Tuesday, November 1st at 2 p.m. We hope you'll join us. Again, thank you to both of you. Terrific job. Thank you for joining us. And people, don't forget to vote.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.